On behalf of Department of English, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University and Government Arts and Commerce College, Netrang, Bharuch, Gujarat, I welcome all the participants and dignitaries to the valedictory session of three-day international e-conference on revisiting William Shakespeare. We are joined by Honorable Vice Chancellor, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, Professor Javed Musarrat. An honor to have him in this session. All the programs or endeavors that we take or think of taking at Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, it is all because of the support and encouragement of Honorable Chancellor, Professor Javed Musarrat. We are joined by Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean Academic Affairs, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, Rajouri. He is another reason why the faculty in Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University has been so engaging in these dire times among COVID-19 pandemic. We are joined by Atanu Bhattacharya. He is Dean School of Language, Literature and Culture Studies, Central University, Gujarat, Gandhinagar. We are thankful to you for joining us in the session. We are joined by Dr. Ghanpat Bhai R. Parmar. He is Government Arts and Commerce College, Bharuch, Gujarat. We are collaborating with them in organizing this event. We are also joined by Dr. Jaswant Rathore, Head Department of English, Government Arts and Commerce College, Bharuch, Gujarat, and Dr. Amit Kapoor sir, and many other dignitaries who have joined us. If I skip someone's name, apologies in advance. Now, without taking much time, I would like to go straight over Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean Academic Affairs, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, for welcome address. Professor Iqbal Pervez. Professor Iqbal Pervez, if you hear me, please unmute and present a welcome address. Professor Iqbal Pervez, if you hear me, please unmute and present a welcome address. Unfortunately, we have lost the contact with uh, Professor Iqbal Affairs.
सबसे ऊपर जो मैंने जिससे ही सेव ना करें ये क्या करते हैं इन्हें ये वाला आइकन अच्छा लगता है
I also request the participants don't unmute unnecessarily. It creates disturbance. I am again referring to Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean Academic Affairs, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University. Yes, but I, due to some issues, either I am not audible to Pervez. Why not? No. What? Am I missing out something or what? Maybe, sir, mic would not be functional. We are having some audio issues with the Dean Academic Affairs, sir. Inconvenience is regretted. We will try to sort it out in a minute.
But Tanvir sir, he was audible right now. He was audible.
Tanvir, there is some technical issue. I'll try to contact him.
I think you give him a buzz, in fact, and find out what's the reason.
Sir, I have already done that, but unfortunately, he's not picking up my phone. He must be busy somewhere. I'll talk to him.
Ma'am, I have talked to Professor. He would be.
Pardon?
I have talked to Dean Academic Affairs, sir. He would be there in a minute.
Okay, fine. Okay, it's okay.
Tanvir,
Hello, sir. Dean Academic Affairs, sir, has joined us back, and I hope. Sir, if you are able to hear me.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Tanvir, Dean Academic Affairs is already in, but you are not able to hear him. There is some problem with the voice. Kindly check it.
We have problem at the end of Dean Academic Affairs, sir.
But
Is he audible to others or only not audible to me?
I just talked to him. He's not audible to others.
Yeah.
He is there.
No, but madam, I could hear him when he prompted in between. I could hear him.
Okay, fine, sir. Tanvir, kindly check it. What's the reason?
It is audible, sir. Tanvir sir. Allahabad.
तनवीर. Yes, sir. आप बोलें सर, आप अनम्यूट करके. एक मिनट.
Am I audible now?
Yes,
Yes, sir. You are.
Thankfully.
What happened?
Yes, sir. You are.
Well, anyway, turn off your phone. So, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, let me extend my apologies. Keep you waiting. There was some technical hassle somewhere, but mercifully that has got resolved. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all to this valedictory function of the 3-day International Conference on Revisiting William Shakespeare, which was organized jointly by the Department of English, Baba Ghulam Shah Basha University, Rajouri, in collaboration with the Government Arts and Commerce College, Netang, Bharuch, Gujarat. So it was a joint venture, but the leading light was the head of the Department of English, Dr. Romina Rashid, who was the source of inspiration, and her dreams were materialized into action by her young colleagues and comrades. And the notable among them is Mr. Tanveer Ahmad and his dedicated team of the colleagues. All of you know that organization of any conference is always a very Herculean task. But if it is on the E mode, that the life becomes somewhat easier. Even after that, the fact remains that there is still a tremendous amount of load of paperwork and also the communication protocols which are required to keep everyone. To that extent, I think I must compliment Mr. Tanveer and his team, but despite having a very short notice, they were able to get such an overwhelming response. And this is got by the fact that the response was from all 4 corners of the country, be it from South India, North India, East India, or the West India. And when I looked at the number of participants from the different universities, you name any university, what is named, and they had their participation there. That speaks greatly about the success of this 3-day wonderful international conference. I had the privilege of attending the inaugural session of the conference. There I had the good fortune of listening to the keynote speaker, Professor Paul Budra from Simon Fraser University, Canada, who spoke about revisiting William Shakespeare in an age of conspiracy. The talk was extremely enlightening for a language lover like me, who otherwise an outsider, and who came to know that conspiracies which are prevalent now were prevalent even at the time of Shakespeare. So they are the conspiracies, therefore, are the ones which are ageless, and it is a continuous phenomena which runs all through. I'm so glad to learn that the response of this conference has been so good that the organizers had tough time to find the slot for these speakers. And this really speaks greatly about the good amount of homework which Tanveer and his team has done to make this conference a great success. The sessions were chaired by the eminent speakers, and the discussions, I was told, remained lively and informative. The more details about the participations and then the themes covered and the people who chaired will be covered by Dr. Romina Rashid. So in order to avoid any kind of repetition, I'm leaving this job to her to do that. In the end, I can't help making an observation. While e-conference makes things very easy, cost-effective, and less time-consuming, but it takes away the charm of the personal face-to-face meeting. There is a certain degree of romance when you have conference face-to-face, when you come to know people, when you meet them, when you exchange your thoughts, when you exchange ideas, when you exchange emails, when you exchange their phone numbers, and then at times you end up making good friends there. So that kind of a romance is missing in these kind of e-conferences. But I can assure the audience that as soon as the situation becomes normal, we are in Baba Ghulam Shah Basha University going to organize a face-to-face conference so that you are able to see this paradise on earth. Let me tell you that BGSBU, which happens to be located on the green and serene patch of nature, is a wonderful place to come and be here. I'm sure this is an ideal place for the academic pursuits. So I extend invitation to all of you that as and when we send you an invitation to have a conference in BGSBU, never ever this opportunity. It is going to be a good lifetime opportunity for you. So with these few words, I will hand it over back to Tanveer for further proceedings.
Thank you. We were listening to the welcome address by Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean at Ghulam Shah Badshah University. I'd like to go over to Dr. Rumina Rashid, Head Department of English, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, to present the report on conference. Dr. Rashid.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am, you are.
Okay. Honorable Vice Chancellor of Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, Professor Javed Musarrat Sahab, Dean Academic Affairs, Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean School of Islamic Studies and Languages, Professor G.M. Malik, Registrar Dr. Ashfaq Zari, Dr. G.R. Parmar, Principal Government Arts and Commerce College, Natrang, Bharuch, Gujarat. Our guest of eminence today, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya, Dean School of Languages, Literature and Cultural Studies, Central University of Gujarat, are eminent chairpersons who chaired the 5 sessions of our international conference. Various people from academic world, research scholars, and my dear friends, good evening to all. I welcome you all to the valedictory function of the 3-day International E-Conference on Revisiting Shakespeare, which was conducted in collaboration with the Government Arts and Commerce College, Natrang, Bharuch, Gujarat. Now, why did we choose this topic for our conference? The reason behind was that Shakespeare is the binding force between all the lovers of literature. Ben Jonson has rightly anticipated that Shakespeare's dazzling future when he declared it was not of an age, but for all times. Shakespeare's ability to summarize the range of human emotions in simple yet profoundly eloquent verse is perhaps the greatest reason for his enduring popularity. His stories transit time and culture. Modern storytellers have continued to adapt Shakespeare's stories to suit modern works. His greatest tragic characters are unparalleled in literature, and he has dwarfed the sublime creations of great Greek tragedians. He not only epitomizes Renaissance humanism, but has contributed to philosophic push of humanism in art and culture. There is abundance of scholarship available on Shakespeare. He is in fact re-researched, like it is said that dismantling the building, erecting a new structure on it from the debris and giving it a new look. This e-conference was organized, as sir has already said, that it was organized on very short notice, and it took us around 15 days to get the things done. But it would not have been possible had we not been supported and encouraged by our Honorable Vice Chancellor. He is like a beacon light, always showing us the right path. He's always keen to promote such kind of academic activities in the university. I would like to make a special mention of our Dean Academic Affairs Professor Iqbal Pervez, who is a guiding force, very supportive, very helpful. Thank you, sir, for all the help that you have rendered to us during this conference. This conference was conducted through virtual mode on Zoom and was live streamed on YouTube channel, Your Academy. We received an overwhelming response from participants across India and abroad. Around 300 participants registered themselves for this conference. The plenary session was held on 20th of June 2020 at 7:30 p.m., wherein Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean Academic Affairs, presented a formal welcome address, and the keynote speaker was Professor Paul Budra from Department of English, Simon Fraser University, Canada. He is also the director of SFU Publications. He delivered his keynote address on topic Revisiting Shakespeare in Age of Conspiracy. He discussed about conspiracy theories of critics against Shakespeare. He focused on the unwarranted theories or bizarre theories which had no groundings to prove their points. Professor Budra, in his address, referred to the conspiracies which questioned Shakespeare's works, his genius. Regarding Shakespeare, there are numerous theories which question the legitimacy of Shakespeare as an author. Professor Budra debunked each theory, and he threw light on how Shakespeare was received by writers, critics, politicians in all ages. He even remarked that great Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi once claimed that Shakespeare was an Arab. Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Javed Musarrat, in his presidential address, appreciated the efforts of Department of English Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University and Government Arts and Commerce College, Natrang Baruch, for organizing this event. Professor G.M. Malik presented the former vote of thanks. On 21st of June and 22nd of June, 5 technical sessions were conducted. The first session was chaired by Professor Rajesh Karan Kal, Head Department of English, University of Mumbai. 14 research papers were presented in this session. The papers were presented on different topics ranging from management to feminism. In the second session, it was chaired by Professor Jagdish Joshi, Director of UGC Human Resource Development Center, Gujarat University, Ahmedabad. Again, 14 research papers from different perspectives were analyzed in this session. In the third technical session, it was chaired by Professor Hitesh Rabia, Head Department of English, the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda. We again had 13 different papers from different perspectives. They were analyzed, the question answers were asked. Then on the second day, the first session, second day, that is 22nd of June, the first session was chaired by Professor Paresh Joshi from Veer Narmad South Gujarat University. And 14 papers were presented, again from different perspectives and from the perspectives pertaining to the present contemporary times. The last session was chaired by Professor Muhammad Asim Siddiqui from Aligarh Muslim University. 14 papers were presented. We had in all 75 participants who presented research papers in 5 technical sessions. The papers were presented on varied themes ranging from management, post-colonialism, feminism, adaptations, pandemic, quarantine, psychoanalytic criticism, ELT, and Marxism. The papers provided a critical insight into the works of Shakespeare, and the paper presenters tried to connect Shakespeare's themes to the present prevailing scenarios. This conference connected us to the people of different cultures, faiths, nationalities, regions, and opened new vistas of discussions. New knowledge was created by using the existing one in a very creative way, and new concepts were generated. That was the main reason of our conference, and Alhamdulillah, we have been able to fulfill it. Thank you very much. Over to Tanveer.
Thank you, Dr. Rumina Rashid. We were listening to the report being presented by Dr. Rumina Rashid, Head Department of English, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University. Now, I'd like to go over to the guest of eminence, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya, Dean, School of Language, Literature and Cultural Studies, Central University, Gujarat, Gandhinagar, to share his views briefly. Over to Professor Atanu Bhattacharya.
Thank you very much, Tanveer. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Okay, so Honorable Vice Chancellor, Honorable Deans, Registrar of Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University and the Government Arts College, Bharuch, for having me here, because both the institutions are kind of collaborated, and it's good to see in this moments of pandemic and these moments where we generally tend to live in our own bubbles when we have face-to-face, as Dr. Rashid clearly pointed out in her address, that what has happened is that these moments which are supposed to be kind of making us lonely, or where we are not supposed to socialize, where our departments of English and departments of humanities, which are basis of socializations, where a pandemic comes and when we are told not to socialize, it is good that these e-platforms are allowing us to collaborate across different regions, across different boundaries, which probably does not happen in a face-to-face situation in such a great fashion. So thank you for having me over here. The interesting thing that once we look at Shakespeare, especially the theme of the conference that I looked at, is that remember, Shakespeare's time was also the age of collaboration. So there was a huge amount of collaboration that was happening across writers, across actors. And if you look at the entire period in which Shakespeare was writing, it was an age of collaborative writing, which probably later, with the rise of individualism and individual writing skills, what we have is we have a movement away from that collaborative effort, from that joint writing mode. And therefore, later, scholars of Shakespeare found it so difficult to put Shakespeare together because we didn't really know which parts were written by Shakespeare, which parts were not written by Shakespeare. And to have a definitive Shakespeare, therefore, took more than 100 years after his death. So what we have when we look at Shakespeare today, therefore, I think it will be interesting to see the different modes of understanding him. So what I'm going to do today, maybe in the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to look at those nodes that as teachers, as research scholars, as people who are interested in the discipline, when we look at Shakespeare, what are the different nodes through which we can look at him? And I'm going to concentrate basically on Shakespeare, not as the great bard or Shakespeare as a Western writer, but our Shakespeare. So Shakespeare, which came to India. And remember, Shakespeare has a long history in India. It's not simply that Shakespeare belongs to Britain or to Europe or to just the Western world, but with colonialism, with the coming of the East India Company and later, of course, the British Crown, Shakespeare very much belongs to us as well. And we encountered him, we negotiated the different ways Shakespeare can be interpreted. We looked at different ways that Shakespeare can be staged. The theatrical productions of Shakespeare had its own flavor when they were produced in India. And therefore, when we look at Shakespeare, probably it's good to claim that Shakespeare is as much ours as it belongs to the Western world. So I'm going to look at our Shakespeare a bit, and I'm going to look at the nodes through which we can look at our Shakespeare, how Shakespeare entered India, and what are the different nodes of that entry, how do we negotiate those entries, and how do we look at Shakespeare from those different nodes. Now, we know that Shakespeare came, the first node, of course, that we are all taught in departments of English is that Shakespeare came with formal educational system. And we have been told that it is, of course, Macaulay has been much maligned, but it was with Macaulay's 1834 minute that we know that English education in a certain institutionalized form came into existence. And later, of course, 20 years down the line, we have the establishment of the universities. And with the establishment of the universities, we have a formal education system that kind of institutionalizes Shakespeare. But if we also go back to the history of what happens with these, what we know by Shakespeare, what we understand by Shakespeare today, especially in India, we are also aware of the fact that Shakespeare had a longer history. So if you look at the East India Company and how it starts establishing itself after 1757, especially in the province of Bengal, we also know that once the province of Bengal is handed over to the East India Company by Shah Alam, the emperor of the Mughal emperor of India at that point of time, which was known as the handing over of the Diwani. So the Diwani of Bengal is given to the East India Company. And by 1765, the East India Company becomes an important player in the eastern part of the country, especially in the provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. We also know that there is also a cultural appropriation that starts happening. So we know that there are institutions that start coming up, like the Asiatic Society in 1774. We know that because of the presence of the white officers in Fort William, and of course with the new development of the city of Calcutta, you needed a certain kind of a cultural entertainment, a certain kind of a culture to continue. And Shakespeare came in that culture. You'll be surprised to know that a large number of Shakespearean plays were actually performed way back in 1760s and 1770s in the newly developing city of Calcutta, where new theaters were built, especially theaters like Star Theatre, which burnt down, then it was rebuilt. And many of these players, many of these actors who came to perform Shakespeare were actually not local actors who did Shakespeare. primarily because we still didn't have access to English. So many of these player companies were actually brought in from England after traveling for 6 to 8 months, and these companies would stay in Calcutta or in Madras or in Bombay for 2 to 3 months, perform the Shakespearean plays, and then move on to other imperial domains like in Hong Kong later, to Singapore, etc. And then they will go back to England. So you have a history of traveling Shakespeare in the imperial lands. And that is an interesting node to look at. So Shakespeare, when we first encounter Shakespeare in India or in the imperial domains, it is not actually through education. It is through these traveling companies which come to India, perform primarily for educated elites, but also mostly for white officers of the East India Company, and later, of course, the British Crown after 1857. And what you have is these traveling companies who perform Shakespeare to contextualize those performances in the local conditions. So obviously they could not perform as they used to perform in the Globe Theatre in England. So they had to perform according to what they could do in these makeshift theatres in Calcutta. So that is the first node that we can look at as research scholars and researchers. And I'm sure that I was looking at some of the papers that were presented during the conference, and they were fascinating ones. So people have looked at, for example, the post-colonial Shakespeare. People have looked at the adaptations of Shakespeare. Probably less amount of research has happened in these early traveling Shakespeares that came to India with the East India Company. But of course, we know that when English became a medium of instruction and got institutionalized in the universities, especially in Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, and later in Allahabad and Punjab in 1882. Around this period, there are huge amounts of Shakespeares that start getting translated and adapted. And that is the second node that we can look at again. So it was not only Shakespeare being performed in English. So Shakespeare was now being performed, especially after the 1830s and the 1840s, when English becomes a medium of instruction. More and more people start getting educated in the language. And there is a certain class of people in Bengal, they are called the Bhadralok, the educated, genteel ones. So this new class of people who have access to English now, but also, of course, access to a certain kind of colonial power, produce a certain kind of Shakespeare through translation and adaptation. Now, since this conference is in collaboration with a college in Gujarat, one of the interesting things that happens in this region, for example, is translation and adaptation of Shakespeare by Parsi theatre. So a large number of Parsis who stay in this region produce and adapt Shakespeare for general masses. So what happens is Shakespeare, which is seen as an elite writer of English, slowly gets disseminated into the masses through these translations and adaptations. If you look at the history of these adaptations and translations, especially of the 1850s, that is the second node I think that we can look at. And there are extremely interesting regional variations of these translations and adaptations. I know a bit about Bengal, so I can say, for example, some of the greatest playwrights in Bengal in the 1870s and 1880s, someone called Girish Chandra Ghosh, for example, who almost gives birth to the modern Bengali theatre, heavily borrows from Shakespeare in terms of the style, in terms of the format of the plays, in terms of the themes of the plays, especially from the historical plays of Shakespeare, etc. In fact, his first play, Girish Ghosh's first play, is a play called Siraj-ud-Dawla, which heavily draws from Macbeth, from Shakespeare. So what you have is an interesting give and take between regional languages and Shakespeare, between Shakespeare as an English writer to Shakespeare as an Indian adapted writer. So what we have is the second node that operates over here. And again, some amount of research needs to happen, especially in regional languages and what happens to Shakespeare at that point of time. The third node that I would just mention is what happens during the 1900s, 1920s, and 1930s, when Shakespeare, again, like in the early times in the 1770s and 80s, I said that there were lots of these Western player companies that traveled to India and performed plays.
By the 1920s and 30s, of course, you have Indian companies now that are traveling all across India, which are performing Shakespeare. The most famous of them is a company called Shakespeareana, which is founded by someone called Geoffrey Kendall. Geoffrey Kendall, incidentally, is the father of Shashi Kapoor's wife. Um, and Kendall and his company perform across India, uh, which goes to all the kings of Travancore and Cochin and Patiala. And so across India, they go to these kingdoms where guest houses are reserved for them, and they perform Shakespeare either in English, most of them in English, but some of them also kind of translated into local languages. So what you have is the traveling Shakespeare coming back in a different form. So you have the first node where Shakespeare traveled from England to India for the white men, mostly men, because women were not supposed to look at theatre. The second point, where due to English translations or English availability of English as a medium of instruction, you have Shakespeare productions in the 1830s and 40s. You have the third node where you have the adaptations and translations of Shakespeare, and then you come back again to the traveling Shakespeare through companies like Shakespeare. And of course, you have the fifth node in post-independence India, where Shakespeare is adapted, translated in different sorts of media, the most important media being, of course, films. So it was quite interesting to see that many of the papers were actually based on Vishal Bharadwaj trilogy, uh, the, the Omkara and Makbul, and of course, Haider, the last one that he did. But even before that, if you look at the history of films in India, you have the production of Hamlet as early as 1954. So you have Hamlet, which is produced in Urdu. The complete Hamlet the entire film is available on YouTube. So people who are interested in films and film adaptations, it would be interesting to have a look at that. And the entire film is directed actually by an Odia, by a man from Orissa who settles in Bombay and produces Hamlet in Urdu. The entire dialogue is translated in what is known as Hindustani, and the play is performed in the form of film. And if you look at the film, it's almost like a play. You have these static cameras, which are just simply looking as if you are looking at theatre. You're not looking at a film at all. So it's a very, very interesting production in 1954. But you also have these adaptations where Shakespeare again travels. So you have films like When Hamlet Came to Mizoram. Now, we don't know how Shakespeare traveled to the Northeast. So you have a film in 1988, I think it was produced, called When Hamlet Came to Mizoram, and how Hamlet was kind of adapted into Mizoram theatre, etc. So you have interesting, of course, you have Gulzar's Angur, an adaptation of Shakespeare. You, of course, have Vishal Bharadwaj, etc. So you have the fifth node. So again, going back, therefore, Shakespeare or our Shakespeare or Indian Shakespeare can therefore be researched from different points of view, from different angles, from 1770s of traveling of British companies to India, to 1820s and 30s of performance of these plays in colleges and universities in English, to 1850s and 60s of adaptations and translations of Shakespeare, to 1920s and 30s of how they were, of course, performed in English in many of the colleges, but how again Shakespeare started traveling through these traveling companies. And of course, at the end, the modern post-colonial, post-independent adaptations of Shakespeare today. So we have different points of Shakespeare that we can have a look at, which I am sure that all the enthusiastic participants of this conference and of this 3-day event, which I'm sure will leave you with an impression of Shakespeare, going back to your departments and again looking at it afresh. And as pointed out by Dr. Rashid and by the Dean in the initial stages, probably we'll meet again face to face in a more happy situation and have a discussion face to face on these different nodes with probably over a cup of tea and a coffee. So thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to speak at this conference. And again, thank both the institutions for having me for this last session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya. So we were listening to a completely different perspective that we hadn't listened up to this time. We were being enlightened about the Indian Shakespeare. So the conference began with the conspiracies about Shakespeare from Canada by Paul Budra, and they have very well been concluded by an Indian Shakespeare. And we were enlightened how he was imported to India by the white men, how he traveled here to different parts of India, and how he was adapted and presented and in front of the Indian audience. Now, I would like to go over to Honorable Vice Chancellor, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, Professor Javed Musarrat, to deliver the presidential address. Professor Javed Musarrat.
Thank you, Tanvir. Thank you very much. I welcome all the audience here, and I'm so pleased to know that this 3 day international conference on revisiting William Shakespeare has been largely attended and has gone very well. It is really heartening to note that about 300 participants registered and more than 75 papers have been presented in the last 2 days. Now, this overwhelming response and large attendance clearly suggests that this conference has provided a great platform to all Shakespeare lovers to deeply explore the versatility of this great writer and the relevance of his work in a contemporary world. Well, he was not only a writer, but also an actor and an owner of a playing company. His work has not only influenced other novelists, but also the painters and musicians. And I have read that there are around 20,000 pieces of music and about three opera linked to the Shakespeare work. And I had a privilege to attend the keynote address also of Paul Bodra from Simon Fraser University, Canada, on Shakespeare and various conspiracy theories, which was very, very informative and fascinating. I do hope that the rest of the sessions in the last 2 days on the identified key areas and the 11 sub themes were also very, very enriching for English literature enthusiasts. Well, the Oxfordian theory of the Shakespeare authorship will continue into 21st century, but in my frank opinion, this conference is definitely a rich tribute to the world greatest dramatist and his extraordinary work. So thanks to Romina, thanks to Tanvir, Dean School of Languages, Professor G.M. Malik, uh, Dean Academic Affairs, Professor Iqbal Pervez, for organizing such a useful and scholastic event. And at the same time, I'm grateful to the co-organizers from Gujarat for all their support. Thanks to Professor Atanu Bhattacharya for enlightening us and providing us a different perspective of Shakespeare's life. With this, I thank one and all. Stay safe and healthy. God bless you all.
Thank you, sir. We were listening to Professor Javed Musarrat, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University. Now, I would like to go over to Dr. Ganpat Bhai R. Pramar, Principal, Government Arts and Commerce College, Netrang, Behruch, for vote of thanks. Dr. Ganpat Bhai R. Pramar.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Shakespeare truly said that pleasure and action make the hours seem short. Personally, I feel that it was an academic journey eh, at via Kashmir to Gujarat and all over the India. Let me assure our academic journey is not over, but will go on in future. Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, Rajouri, Jammu Kashmir. Tanvi sir, there is too much noise.
Please go ahead. Go ahead. You are audible.
Government Arts and Commerce College, Netrang, and Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, Rajouri, Jammu Kashmir, have jointly organized the 3 days international e-conference on revisiting William Shakespeare. At the outset, let me state proudly that we are Indians and we know how to get benefit from this lockdown and quarantine stage. Historically, our sages and saints went in self-quarantine modes to achieve the divine blessing. When Gandhiji had to face such condition, he wrote great literature and helped us for independence. Sir, we know that positive meaning of the quarantine stage, we Indian have no profit from the worst condition. So the conference was a grand success because it connected participants from all over the India. A prominent university, Jammu Kashmir, Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, and our Government Arts and Commerce College Netrang jointly organized this particular event, and participants from all over India, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, and other parts of India have take part and present their paper. It is a great unity. I sincerely thank Professor Paul Budra, Simon Fraser University, Canada, for keynote address of our international conference. Sir, he rightly mentioned that Shakespeare works have universal teaching. He also talked on the conspiracies in personal, professional, and political spheres of human life. I sincerely thank to Professor Javed Musrat, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, Rajouri, Jammu Kashmir. Shakespeare stated that motivation have no boundaries. Sir, your motivational speech boosted us in our academic venture. I thank Dr. Iqbal Parvez, Dean Academic Affairs, Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, for his kind support. I also thank Professor G.M. Malik for his academic help. Dr. Romina Rashid has constantly contacted Dr. Rathod, and she has proved that she is an able academician with lot of professional skills. As a head of Department of English, Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, Rajouri, she sincerely worked as an able organizer of this conference. She will certainly look forward for many professional projects in future. I thank Dr. Asfaq Jari, the Registrar of Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, for this magnanimous support. On this occasion, I sincerely thank our chairperson of technical session. I thank Professor Rajesh Karankal, Head Department of English, University of Mumbai. Dr. Jagdish Joshi, the Director of UGC, Human Resources Development Center, Ahmedabad. Professor Hitesh Ravaya, Head Department of English, Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda, Gujarat. Professor Piyush Joshi from Bir Narmad South Gujarat University, Surat. And Professor Asim Siddiqui, Head Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University, Uttar Pradesh, for their Herculean academic help. Sir, these chairpersons are well known for their academic brilliance. I heartily thank to Dr. Attanu Bhattacharya, Dean, School of Language, Literature, Culture, Studies from Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar, for making this conference grand. Sir, I will have say in depth to you. I sincerely thank Malia Aslam for this constant help to make this conference. How can I forget Dr. Jaswant Rathod, the coordinator of this conference of Government Arts and Commerce College, Netrang, Gujarat, and Mr. Tanveen Ahmed, the coordinator of Baba Gulam Shah Badshah University, Jammu Kashmir. Both of them worked very hard to make this e-conference in a grand success. Lastly, I thank all participants from all over the India. I thank the team of organizing committee, both from Government Arts and Commerce College Netrang and Baba Ghulam Shah Badshah University, Jammu Kashmir. To conclude with the enlightening quote of Shakespeare, it is not the star to hold our destiny, but it in ourselves. Let's work hard and let's make our academic efforts prosperous in future. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Ganpat Bhai R. Pramar, Principal, Government Arts and Commerce College, Netrang, Bharuch, Gujarat, was presenting vote of thanks. Now, as coordinator of this valedictory session, I extend my thanks to all the participants, to the dignitaries who were part of this valedictory section and of the whole 3-day international e-conference on William Shakespeare. A slight announcement is that these certificates would be distributed to all the participants with registration number. It would take at least 3 days time, and you all will receive the certificates within 3 days time. I would say at the end that these 3 days were literary fest, and all the participants who were part of this 3-day international conference were content and jubilant. And this is obvious through the messages that I have been receiving. If I start reading them, it may take another an hour to complete the valedictory. So I would be thanking all the participants who were sending their congratulatory messages either on YouTube or on our Zoom app. Thank you, one and all. I'd like to thank again Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Javed Musarat, for sparing his precious time with us, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya, Professor Iqbal Pervez, Dean Academic Affairs, Baba University, and my organizing team. I'd like to mention them again at the end. Dr. Rumina, Department of English, Dr. Rathore, Head Department of English, Government Arts and Commerce College, Netrang, Bharuch, Dr. Maria, Assistant Professor of English, Baba Ghulam Shah Baj University. Thank you all for being there and making this conference successful. On this note, I'd like to end this meeting for one and all. Thank you for being there.